Being a chartered manager means that you are a specialist in that area, and it means you've got all the skills to do the job to the best of its ability.
You are seen as a leader, a true leader who has credentials behind the great work you've already been doing.
It's enhanced my understanding, it's enhanced my skill set, it's improved my mindset.
It makes all the difference.
This session is recorded and will be available on the CMI website and YouTube channel. Join the conversation by using the live chat box for your questions and comments. We'll answer as many as we can during the Q&A.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Diversity and Inclusion, Removing the Fear of Open Conversations digital event. My name is Mary and I am an event delivery coordinator at CMI. Please don't forget to join the conversation by using the live chat box. Feel free to ask any questions you have for the speakers, and we'll answer as many questions as possible during the Q&A session. I'll now hand over to Anthony to begin today's event.
Thanks, Mary. Hello, everyone. My name's Anthony Thomas. I'm the Diversity and Inclusion Lead for CMI Wales and a Senior Lecturer in Strategy and Entrepreneurship at the University of South Wales. In my spare time, I'm a leadership and management consultant, and I also like to chip away at my part-time PhD, which is exploring the challenges managers and leaders face when implementing diversity programs and initiatives into UK sport organisations. For additional context, I'm currently at the data analysis stage of my PhD, which is very exciting for me anyway. Whilst hosting this event and asking our guest speaker questions, I will also give you a small insight into my research and what I'm finding out at this current stage. I only have about 10 minutes to do this, and I could speak about it all day. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to pop them in the chat. Before we begin today, I'd just like to set the scene within the EDI space. Diversity, inclusion, equality, equity, intersectionality are all very sensitive topic areas. The added influence of macro environmental challenges only adds to the ambiguity we are currently facing. You only have to watch the news to see how people are feeling at the moment, whether it's in the UK or across the world. Researchers stated that if an organisation is more diverse, it is more likely to be productive and more profitable. However, this is complex because EDI comes in many forms and has visual dimensions such as age, your gender, your race, your physical ability. And we also have things that are more difficult to identify, such as your postcode you live in, your education, your marital status, or your sexual orientation. All of these diversity dimensions can be acknowledged as different and aid diversity of thought. But it's not all positive. Having a diverse organization can allow for people to become siloed. Organizations can assist tokenism and also make people feel like they no longer have the opportunities they once had. Ultimately, making organizations less productive and profitable by trying to promote diversity. This is something that pops up a lot. EDI can be an equitable minefield. As a disclaimer for this sensitive topic area today, I'd just like to say that I'm by no means an activist in the area of diversity, but I am an advocate of happiness, and even more specifically, happiness within the workplace. My work and goal isn't to make people uncomfortable or feel bad. It is to empower and bring people together. With all of this in mind, the management of diversity within organizations is crucial. As earlier mentioned, my research is exploring the challenges managers and leaders face when implementing diversity programs and initiatives into UK sport organizations. I know that's quite a mouthful. Although the industry perspective of my research is sport, the findings will be and are relevant across organizations of many sizes, industries, and sectors. My research is less around societal diversity and more around the management of diversity from a business perspective. Today, I'll be highlighting some of the challenges faced by managers and leaders, but not necessarily with specific solutions at this point. This is because solutions can depend on a variety of scenarios and need to be bespoke. The size of the organization, how diverse a workforce is, the resources available, buy-in from senior management all play a different part into how organizations can analyze diversity individually. I do have some key points to help support in removing the fear surrounding EDI, but these will be addressed a little bit later. The reason I'm providing this information is because if you feel you're experiencing some of the challenges mentioned today, just know that you may not be on your own, as there may be other people experiencing similar, if not the same challenges you are. To add more context here, for my research, I interviewed 31 people in management and leadership roles who are responsible for delivering diversity-led programs and initiatives. Additionally, I asked my interviewees to bring 3 images describing how they felt about diversity in the workplace, and I also wrote an ethnographic diary to highlight my thoughts, biases, and feelings of the interviews and images. It's quite, well, it still is, it was, and still is quite a large task that was quite emotionally and physically draining. I'll say draining, more tiring, but tremendously valuable and exciting. Well, I find it exciting anyway. This is the first time I've spoken about my research in this way, and my analysis is not yet complete, but I would like to let you know about some of the themes that are arising and at this stage, as I feel like it's quite pertinent and quite important. Here are some of the areas that have been highlighted so far. Mary, could you upload the slides for me, please? Okay, so here are, I guess, 5 themes that have popped out of my research of late. Challenges to the unknown macro environment. Having to react to social movements, political pressures, and what is happening in the media. This makes strategic planning even more difficult, as you never really know what's around the corner with EDI. So you have to be ready to react all of the time, no matter how much you plan. Fear and silence. This is a key one as well. There are lots of people worried about saying the wrong thing when trying to learn about colleagues or people in general. We are now aware that what is put out into the internet and intranets can't come back. So now lots of managers and leaders remain, or they like to stay quiet rather than saying anything at all, which can be quite dangerous and divisive. The challenge of being within the majority group, often meaning white, male, or both. Lots of managers and leaders feel they cannot walk in the shoes of the oppressed, feel awkward in sensitive EDI situations, and feel that they might not be the right person for the job due to the vastness of diversity. And that sort of leads back into the fear of silence too. And the challenge of being a minority or global majority, often meaning non-white. Some managers and leaders who are not white feel they have to work even harder to break down barriers and prove they are there on merit. Also having to be resilient, as they may have been discriminated against, whether intentionally or unintentionally, perhaps in the form of microaggressions. And then there's ever-changing terminology, which was a large thing that popped out too. As there is no formal EDI training, there are many perspectives on terminology. To make it even more confusing, people like to be addressed with and like to hear different terminology. Terminology can go from empowering to derogatory in a very short space of time. What I haven't put on there as well is the ambiguity around intersectionality too. It's a word that's used a lot of late, and I feel there's a lot of unknown areas with regards to intersectionality, and people have tried to unpack it for a long time. But yeah, that's where I am with my research. But what I'd like to do now is to ask you, the audience, some questions. All right, so I've put together a question to see how you, the audience, feel about the themes I've just mentioned, if you can remember, but they're all there on the screen. All right, so what I'd like you to do is to put your answers in the chat. The question is, which of the discussed challenges faced by managers and leaders do you feel impact you or your team the most? That is challenges of the unknown macro environment, fear and silence, or fear leading to silence, the challenge of being within the majority group, often meaning white, male, or both, the challenge of being in a minority or global majority group, often meaning non-white, and ever-changing terminology. If you could put those in the chat, we'll have a look at the comments as we go through, whilst I have a sip of water. It's quite difficult to see which ones are most popular looking through the comments, but I'll give it a go. I can see that the fear leading to silence is popping up quite a bit here. If anybody is willing to, I guess, add a little bit of context to their choice, that would be great too, as into the reasons why, but we will have a Q&A session a little bit later as well. Terminology is popping up quite a bit as well. And being the majority, sorry. I guess it's we're getting a little bit of everything popping up here. I've got a different one from Roger here. Tokenism leading to silence for fear of punitive action. Indeed, it could. Tokenism can often open a can of worms within an organization. Fear of saying the wrong thing. Yeah, I will get to it a little bit later, but I do speak about having a safe space within organizations, and allowing people to make mistakes is crucial if it comes from a good place. There is a lot of ambiguity surrounding microaggressions, because microaggressions can come from a good place at times. And there's a saying of death by 1,000 cuts for the person who's receiving the microaggression. We've also got the macro environment too. The macro environment is completely reactive, as I earlier mentioned. It's very difficult to know what's around the corner. There can be movements, there can be rallies, there can be incidents that take place that you as an organization may feel under pressure to have to make an announcement or to do something about it, or to speak to your internal colleagues about things. There's a lot of pressure there, and you can wake up one morning and the world's a complete. We've got fear. I think we've got an amalgamation of some of these. But what I'd like to, I guess, wrap this up with is by saying that I see a lot of people agree with some of the fears that managers and leaders are facing. David Parker said fear leading to silence is a big one. I've seen this at uni with no erasing once something is said. Definitely. Nowadays, once you put something out there, you can't take it back, especially if it's written and on the internet. And this leads to people saying nothing at all, even if they feel really passionate about things. And if you're leading an organization, it's not going to do any favors. Okay, that's great. I really thank you so much for your input so far. It's very much appreciated. We will revisit some of these a little bit later. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to introduce our guest speaker. I'd like to introduce you to Piers Martin. So Piers Martin is a performance leadership development specialist and coach working across sport, business, and academia. He is the head of leadership and workforce development for the Premier League, supporting the identification and development of leaders across professional football, and the director of Podium Performance, a leadership development consultancy. Piers has held senior leadership experience in roles such as chair, SID, NED, trustee, and CEO in a range of organizations across sport, business, education, and the third sector, both domestically and internationally. For over 25 years, Piers has led and advised a variety of Olympic and Paralympic sports, national Olympic committees, and international federations, supported startups, and consulted for established organizations and coached senior leaders across sport and business. He has an MBA from Alliance Manchester Business School and an MSc in organizational psychology, and is undertaking a doctorate in leadership development. Piers is a chartered fellow of CIPD and EMCC accredited coach, an ABP business psychologist, and a fellow of the RS. Wow, what an introduction. We are so lucky and thankful to have you to come and speak with us today, Piers. From that introduction alone, we know that you have a plethora of experience, but knowing you personally, I know that only scratches the surface. I have 3 questions for you today, but firstly, could you tell us about why you feel so passionate about diversity and why you feel this is important?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks, Anne. Thanks for that introduction. I have personal and professional reasons. I think personally, my identity and my values, I'm very strong around fairness and around the principle and the power and the belief of individual differences from a psychological perspective, but also from a business perspective. I'm deaf. I normally wear hearing aids, or I use technology to be able to hear. My mother's Indian, and these are two. My deafness is a stealth disability, and I think these are things that I feel much more comfortable talking around today, whereas I would suggest growing up I would hide away from some of those. So I feel passionate around that. But if I go back to the power of the belief in individual differences, you'll know from the work that you do with me, this is one of the most important things that we do in terms of leadership, allowing a leader to be able to adapt to the environment in front of them, to be able to adapt to their strengths and some of their development areas, but also to understand the team and the people that they work with. And it goes beyond diversity and intersectionality of protected characteristics. It goes to lived experience. It goes through social mobility. It floods through the lived experience of an individual. And that person brings an individual strength and an individual difference that is unique to them compared to anybody across the globe. So why would you not pick on the background? Why would you not pick on the expertise? Why would you not pick on the strengths of that diversity across the board? It just makes no sense that you would not.
Thanks, Piers. That's amazing. I'll get to the questions. I have 3 questions, and I also have some reserved questions, but I'll get to the first one. What are your methods of developing and nurturing a diverse team, and what are the pros and cons of this?
So if I go back to individual differences, that the principle of having a diverse team, I think goes beyond what we would traditionally talk around EDI. I will look for what the purpose of the team is for. I will look for who are the kind of people that we want in terms of, some people talk around fit. We'll talk around the strengths and the development areas that some people have. We'll talk about the derailers that an individual may well have. So it may well be a strength, but then under pressure, under fatigue, under stress, that person might well exhibit a strength that then becomes a derailer, and it derails an individual and derails a team. I think the intersectionality of experiences and lived experiences of individuals that come to the team brings not only a fresh perspective, but it allows people the opportunity to debate, which is something I'll come back to in a minute. I think we're going to talk quite a lot around trust, and you've spoken around the fear of speaking out, the fear of saying things, fear of getting things wrong. I think it comes back to intent sometimes. We want to be able to have a team that is trustworthy and can build trust within. I'm a big fan of the F word, failure. How do we feel comfortable failing fast? How do we feel comfortable making mistakes as a team? And how do we feel comfortable being able to discuss and to debate those mistakes to improve things? The same thing can be applied very much to the trust that we have within conversations around diversity and inclusion, so that we don't have a fear. It actually becomes something that we can have an open conversation around. But trust is something that does take a long time to be able to build. So the starting point is always to be able to look at the individual, to be able to look at you, but to go beyond understanding me and understanding the team, to be able to understand the impact of the environment that has on those individuals, as well as being able to understand the narratives and the stories that those people come with. And I think if you combine the personality of an individual with their lived experience, which is entirely unique to them, it may well be that they've grown up in the same place, or they've gone through the same conflict, or they've grown up within the same religion, or they've grown up in the same school, they've grown up with a similar family setting. It may well be that those people have similarities, but they will have a unique lived experience. And then they will grow and develop their values, which are related to both the personality and to that. And you combine those three things as a key: how to understand that person, and then how to understand that person when things aren't so great. Not only do you notice somebody from a professional context, but you notice somebody in terms of when things aren't going quite so well for them. So you can care and you can be compassionate as a leader. So those are sort of the core thing. I think it's about getting that balance right and building that trust from the beginning, understanding people and understanding their stories, and not focusing on it as being an EDI process, but focusing on actually the individual that's in front of you. And then trying to eradicate that fear and trying to understand the intent of the individual in front of you as you build that trust.
Thank you, Piers. That's amazing. I think we've had lots of conversations in the past regarding cultural capital and the journeys that we've been along, and how they impact you, because you carry your experiences around with you everywhere. And as soon as that managers and leaders recognize people as individuals, I guess the sooner that we can be productive together within the environment, both inside and outside of the workplace too. Thank you, Piers. I'll move on to question 2. There can be a magnitude of outside noise that takes place in society at times. What impact does this have on your organizational planning and how you adapt strategically?
Yeah, I grew up a long time ago where we didn't have mobile phones, and certainly not smartphones, where the internet used to beep and screech, and it would take a day to be able to download an email. So I had this conversation with my father, who's in his 90s, and around the differences between when he grew up and when I grew up, and the differences with my children are growing up now. There's a huge amount of noise, there's a huge amount of things we don't understand yet and are starting to understand around technology and around AI, and around people's ability to be able to create news and information which is not necessarily accurate. It might be fake, not necessarily accurate. We are only starting to understand that our decisions are not our own, and that there's a huge amount of bias within that. I think we've lost the power of debate. And when I add a caveat to that, when the intention of that debate is pure, when the intention is to cause conflict and to cause harm, I have no interest in. But where I believe we've lost the power of debate to educate and to improve and to understand and to discuss. And I think the power of debate becomes binary on social media. You're either in a camp or you're not in a camp, rather than just discussing and understanding somebody else's perspective, which might or may not alter your own. And I think we've lost the ability to think critically. And it's a key part of being a leader and a manager, is being able to think critically about the information that you're being given. Why would you focus very much on the data that you're being given in one area, and then when an individual comes to you, not apply exactly the same process and understand and think critically around it, and to debate it and to discuss and to understand? So yes, there's a huge amount of noise. I think that a lot of that noise is generated by bad people, evil people, but a lot of that noise sometimes we don't get to because it's lost in the wider bubble. We always try and focus on the people within the team. We try and help leaders to be able to focus on the people that are in the present and next to them, and being able to have an impact on them. And we try and get them to be able to understand and to build the trust that is in front of them, being able to check and challenge some of the information that is perhaps coming from broader ranges, and to be able to have that debate and to understand that their decisions are not their own, and their biases will have a big impact on that debate and on that discussion, and on perhaps some of the ways in which they try and improve things. And the more we can educate people around that, and the more people can learn around that and try and understand that, I think the noise will start to subside, or whether the noise will start to subside, but rather we cope with the noise and we manage that. And I say this as somebody who's deaf and is able to take out hearing aids. And I live with tinnitus, and that is a really useful analogy, because being able to manage quite powerful tinnitus is in the mind, it's not in my ear. But how do I manage that within the mind? How do I make sure that I am really careful about how I consume knowledge and how I consume information? You and I were talking around this earlier. If there's something that I don't understand, I will look for a broad range of different people and data points to be able to help me to understand something a little bit better. And I will ask somebody. And I think that's really important. And I think sometimes we're expected to treat somebody in a particular way, or speak to someone in a particular way, or use particular language. And I'm very much a fan of asking the person in front of you, how you want to be addressed, how you want to be spoken to, how you want to conduct a relationship, be it business or professional.
Thank you, Pete. There's so much to unpack there. I feel like the element of debate is really important and interesting as well. And it depends on how it's delivered and the outcome that you want from that debate. Because I think we spoke about this morning. You can have a debate with someone and you're trying to bring home your own point, and that's your only reasoning for having a debate. But then there's the flip side of that, where you can have a debate where you actually want the other person you want to learn from the other person to get their understanding of the topic area, which is really important. Yeah, thank you so much for that, Piers. That's great. And I guess what you were talking about there, and being able to speak to people openly and in an honest environment, sort of segues nicely into our third question, which is, how do you provide a safe space within your roles as a diversity-led manager? And we'll get to that. And what are the 3 key pieces of advice you would offer anybody managing a diverse team?
So I don't see myself as a diversity-led manager, but that's partly because I feel as if every manager should be diversity-led, but it should be something which is a given. We shouldn't be, in a way, we shouldn't be talking about it. We shouldn't be expecting to see it as something which is a thing. And I'll probably come back to that in a minute, I'm sure. I'd say the 3 key things are around psychological safety. Now, this is something which people talk around all the time, and I'm not sure that people necessarily understand what it really means. Psychological safety doesn't mean a fluffy space where everybody can say what they like and feel comfortable and there's no conflict. Conflict is a good thing. It's certainly a good thing in terms of improving things and in terms of debating. So that's the first thing. But to be able to build that space where everybody feels safe at contributing and that they feel that conflict is good rather than confrontation, trust does take time. And being able to build that trust and being able to build the fact that somebody is coming with good intent rather than bad intent, I think is really important. And the third thing, to be able to do both of those things, you need to be able to understand the individuals in front of you. There are plenty of people who say you need to be able to keep your private life out of work and out of professional, your professional work. I think there needs to be an element of being able to understand the individual as much as that individual will be able to freely give. And it comes back to, if I can understand the identity of the person in front of me, and as you say, if we go back to cultural capital and the story that person can tell around their personal identity, their values, around their own experience as they've been growing up, those narratives help me to be able to understand and be able to help me to be able to become a compassionate leader. And it helps that group to be able to come up with, going back to that constructive conflict, being able to feel comfortable talking around things that perhaps you wouldn't have done before. So those would be the 3 things just in terms of developing a safe space. But I go back to my first point, which is don't be hoodwinked by this idea that psychological safety is something which is a cuddly space. It should be something which allows individuals to check and challenge. It should be a safe space where somebody can say things. But I go back to the point I made at the beginning of this conversation. It comes back to the intent. If somebody comes with evil intent, well, that's now wrong. But that's human beings from the start, isn't it?
Yeah, most definitely. And again, having a an audience or group around, say an audience, having a group of people around you that you can trust, having that critical friend that you know you can have an open and honest conversation with is quite valuable. I learn from you, Piers, and you said in the past that you've learned from me. I still don't believe you, but we have a good sort of rapport, and you allow that space. And knowing the team that you manage, I know that you've created that safe space, which is a reason why I feel like you'd be so valuable to this conversation today. I'd really like to ask one of the reserve questions, which is just around you and the upskilling of yourself. At present, there's like no formal training to develop managers for creating a diverse-led environment. How and where do you develop yourself in this space, Piers?
I think that's a good point. I'm sure we're going to come on to EDI training and development later, but throughout this, you've heard me speak around this golden thread of understanding individual differences and understanding the people in front of you. Now, to be able to do that, a lot of the work that I've done throughout my career has been around understanding the psychology of personality, has been around understanding. I spent the vast majority of my working career working with disabled athletes, for example, and I've probably learned more about the myths just simply by chatting, just simply by working and spending time. Reverse mentoring is something that I don't think we give enough credence to, but it has to be a balance. There has to be a power balance between, say, a disabled person working with a chief exec, explaining what their life is like. So I've learned more from informal conversations and spending time with those disabled athletes and disabled coaches, for example, throughout my sporting career. I don't think formal training works. We know that doesn't. There's enough evidence that proves that. But what does work is stories and narratives. And what does work is being able to meet people that are able to explain why your belief around them might be completely wrong. I use my own deafness, for example. There are 87,000 people who use BSL. There are 12 million deaf and hard of hearing. And yet everyone will assume that I will need an interpreter to be able to sign. My signing's terrible. There is an understanding how I need to be able to interpret and how I need to be able to communicate. But people just need to ask me that question. And I think that's the key thing for me, which is I learn just by asking questions. I ask you so many questions. And if I'm uncomfortable around something, I'll say, look, I'm uncomfortable asking this. Are you okay if I ask you this question? And as we get to know each other, I feel more comfortable with being able to ask the questions I'm more and more uncomfortable about. And that's how I learn. I don't learn by sitting in a room with somebody telling me around, the Equality Act. What I do learn is somebody talking around the intersectionality of somebody who has had barriers and the reason why those barriers have been a problem, because I might be interpreting them in a completely different way. It's like those pictures that you see which show two different things. It comes back to that perspective. And if you don't ask questions and you don't debate with somebody, you don't understand what they're looking at. You're seeing an old woman and they're seeing a young woman, or you're seeing a duck and somebody's seeing a rabbit. Do you know what I mean?
That's great. Thank you so much for that, Piers. I'd like to just add a little bit in here and speak to the audience. There is a section here for the audience to ask questions. And if I guess I know Mary and Mike are in the background there. If you could help me sort of like when we get some questions from the audience, if you could help me bring them through, and we'll select a couple whilst we're going live. I have some pre-submitted questions from people who have asked before this event. So I'm going to go through 3 of those questions. But whilst I'm going through these next 3 questions, if you have any questions in the audience, please put them in the chat, and then hopefully they'll come through to me, and we'll have a little bit of time to answer those for you. So I'll get into the pre-submitted questions from the audience. I have a question from Jamie. How do you open a conversation with somebody who you know will already be confrontational?
Well, look, we had this. We touched on this before, didn't we? The conflict can be good. Confrontation is not. If somebody is coming at you with an intent to harm, verbally or physically or in any other way, that intent to harm is with them. It comes back to the old Eleanor Roosevelt quote about nobody can make you feel inferior but yourself. It's a basic leadership and management issue to be able to deal with somebody who wants to be confrontational and wants to be belligerent. That isn't anything to do with diversity. If they've got a belief, that belief is nothing unless they do something with it. If that person has a belief and they're prepared to discuss it with you openly, that's good conflict. I don't understand why you have this perspective. I want to be able to give you my perspective. They might well think they're educating you. You might well think that they've got a completely different perspective. But understanding what that person is there to be able to, understanding what the outcome is there to do is a big start. But my view is if somebody is already coming at you with the aim of being confrontational, then that is the individual that is at fault. And if it's confrontation and not conversation, then you're asking the question, look, if you genuinely want to sit down and have a conversation with me, I'd be really open to that. But you've also got to be open to being able to understand and respect their perspective and respect their point of view, even if you don't believe in it. And even if society doesn't believe in it, clearly without crossing illegal lines. So that's the first thing. And I think when we come back to psychological safety, and Jamie, that psychological safety and the trust and the understanding of that individual differences is trying to understand the person in front of you. We've spoken a lot, haven't we, around how Nelson Mandela sought to understand his guards and sought to understand the people who were his captors and sought to understand why. Clearly, it was wrong, but he sought to understand, to be able to believe and to see different perspectives. And I think if we can do that, then we're on the right route. But the first question would be, is this a confrontation? In which case it's not good, or is this a conversation?
Thanks, Biz. I guess it's a bit of an ambiguous question as well, because there are so many things that depend on how you would sort of address that whole confrontation. If it's in an organization and that person sits hierarchically above you, how do you address it? If they're on the same level, or if they're one of your subordinates, how do you address that too?
The thing around that though is I've always been comfortable speaking to individuals as human beings. I've had a lengthy career, and perhaps that gives you a little bit more confidence than somebody who is an early stage career. I understand that and I accept that. It is also very difficult to give feedback upwards, and giving feedback and providing feedback. If somebody is not open to receiving feedback, which is a gift and which is really hard to do, if that feedback is, I find it confrontational, I'm just simply giving you my perspective, that's useful. And any leader within that organization should see that as being useful. And we've discussed quite a lot around, you're in a position whereby if all of the leaders are confrontational around something specific and your values are clashing, it may be the right time to leave. If, however, you feel as if you can have a real impact and a real change by simply being open and honest. I'm a big fan of the book by Kim Scott, Radical Candor. There are some elements in there where she very much talked around if you can get to a position whereby feedback is very much that gift and that you're providing this feedback to that individual. I think that's a good thing.
Thank you, Piers. We also have a question from Fiona. How can I provide EDI in an organization where my leaders do not view it as a priority or are frightened of the political implications of aspects of EDI, especially trans rights?
I think my personal view is that EDI has become a thing. It certainly has in my industry. It's become a thing that a person does, and it become a project. And therefore, when, for example, if our organizations, our clubs are audited, and we need to check that they have the right levels of understanding around diversity, inclusion, the right understanding around safeguarding issues, for example, child protection, we need to be able to audit. But what I see too much is leaders turning around and saying, well, that's such and such's job. They're the EDI lead. And I go back to the point I made before, which is diversity and inclusion should be inherent. You shouldn't be a diversity-led manager. You should just be a manager that clearly wants to have a good team. So if you ask a manager, what do they want out of their employees. They want those employees to be able to perform. They want a team that they can build trust and they can develop and they can grow. So therefore, they clearly need diversity, because we know that diversity works in terms of performing teams. So if that's the case, EDI needs to stop being a thing. EDI needs to be something which is led and promoted, and the title of this, removing the fear of open conversations. I do understand that leaders are in a position, as you climb up managerial positions and as you become more responsible, you have more responsibilities, you are thinking around wider aspects, and it is not as easy as people think. Hardest aspect is saying no sometimes. But if we go back to if they're not seeing diversity as a priority, they're not seeing high performance as a priority, because understanding, bringing in the best possible team and understanding how that performing team can work better, you're simply not doing your job as a manager, as a leader, because the whole point should be around developing your team and developing your people and developing the organization. There will be, we go back to the question around societal noise, there will always be societal noise. And I understand why people are frightened perhaps of political implications, but it then comes back down to what is it that the organization is there to be able to achieve? What's the organizational culture want to be able to achieve? Whether you're 300 or 3,000 or 300,000 staff, you should be able to develop that in terms of the culture. And if you look at a manager and a manager feels as if they are developing a diverse approach, you don't need someone doing EDI. But perhaps that's just a bit of a dream for the future, and Fiona.
It's a lot of people's dreams. Again, speaking to lots of people, are doing themselves out of a role. So I shouldn't need my job as an EDI manager, a specific EDI manager, or race equality, or anything along those lines, because it should be, as we mentioned earlier, it should be like a stick of rock through the organization where everybody is a part of it. But I guess the problem, and one of the challenges for that is that it takes a lot of time and energy for you to do it, because you're ultimately a member of staff and you're paid to, I guess, tick off the things that the organization needs you to do. And unless supporting an inclusive environment is one of those main things, it's going to be an additional and a supplementary thing that has to be done perhaps a lot of the time in your own time. And a lot of the research and all of these conversations you have, you're not generally paid to do that.
I mean, leaders and managers are there to look at the efficiencies and the effectiveness of the organization. If we can show that we know that we know that everybody has individual differences. Every single person on the planet has an individual difference, and so therefore we have to understand that. We have to be able to work the best to get the best out of that individual and the best out of those teams. And by working together to be able to do that, we know that we will be doing the best for the organization. And I wouldn't suggest necessarily that people who understand that would be losing their jobs. They should be promoted. They should be promoted because they understand people. And at the end of the day, people who are in managerial positions and leadership positions, understanding the individual is the most important. The number of interviews that you and I have given across our industry, I would say 90% plus will always say, what's the number one thing? About people. It's about people. It's about understanding people. And all of the people I meet who are in those kind of roles that you've mentioned, EDI roles, they understand the individual differences of the people in front of them. That to me is a good manager. It's a good leader.
Amazing. Thank you, Peter. Question 3, and then I realise I've got some questions here from the audience, which is great. Final question from the pre-submitted is a question from Lillian. Is diversity and inclusion training still relevant?
So we've covered this slightly before, but I think sometimes it gives leaders a way out, gives them a comfort blanket. If things aren't working, we'll stick everyone through formal EDI training. And don't get me wrong, there's a need to have a base understanding of some of these things. I think, I learned from the slide that you put up before. I learned from your research. I learned from talking through with you. But I think once you've gone through that should be something which is just as important as all of the policies as when somebody enters an organization. So I think the question is perhaps we'll flip it, Lillian. Diversity and inclusion training has never been a good thing because it doesn't work. We know the evidence shows clearly it doesn't work. However, getting the outcome is that people understand the power of individual differences, that people understand diversity and intersectionality, they understand some of the terms. And going back to the title of this whole session, they feel as if they can have open conversations without fear. That's the most important thing. And as I've said several times throughout this session, one of the most important things in that is understanding individual differences and understanding the narratives that people show. It does far more to bring people together, to have an interview, for example, with somebody who comes from a different background from perhaps the vast majority of your team, and to get them to talk through some of the myths that you may well find around deafness, around disabilities, around somebody that might well come from an area that you might well have decisions and biases around them, and you might well think differently around them. Get them to think differently around it. And those sessions, rather than sit in a classroom for 2 hours with somebody telling you about diversity, sit and learn and understand and have conversations. And that is far more important. Reverse mentoring, I've mentioned a few times, is one of the most powerful things if the balance is correct. Bring people in that you know will be able to talk around their backgrounds in a very different way, but also celebrate. And you and I work on a program which is very much around diversity. And one of the best conversations that we've had around that is somebody who came and said, look, I'm a straight, white, able-bodied man. Why am I on this in terms of a diversity-led program? And we both said, because the whole point is around individual differences, and it's the whole. It's not about picking people. And somebody mentioned tokenism beforehand. It's not about that. It's about making sure that we can all learn from each other. And the reason why that program is so powerful is not because you or me or somebody else stood at the front of the room talking around it. It's the conversations they have where they can understand a little bit more around it. All you do, Anne, is you set that framework so they can have those conversations. So Lillian, back to your original question, the outcome is still essential. It's absolutely still relevant. But I think the process that we go through has become formalized, because a training session that costs 2 hours, that's 2 hours, that costs a small amount of money because we can put it online, that's a way out. That's an easy way out. That's not dealing with the issue and dealing with the outcome.
Thank you so much, Fitz. And I'm so glad that you alluded to that diversity training doesn't work. I found out the hard way. In my earlier days of starting my PhD, I wanted to look into the long-term impact of diversity training, and with 9 months of reading, ultimately I found out that diversity training doesn't work. And then you may ask, so why does everybody use it? It's because it's an easy way out. It's like an insurance it's like an insurance part that organizations play. Oh, you've done this, you've had your training and you've done that, so you can get out. That's your fault. And as well as that, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. People make a lot of money off diversity training because it isn't regulated. But anyway, thank you so much for that, Piers. Great. And I know we could probably speak all day long about it, but I think we've only got about 13 minutes left, and we have some great questions in the chat box here. I have one that's specifically for you, Piers, from Stuart Palmer, which is, do you find talking about your deafness helps to create a safer space for others to open up their own diversities?
I think it does now. I think when I was growing up, I didn't particularly want to. I could get away with it. I have small hearing aids. Bizarrely, AirPods and the technology with Apple, I think, work as well, if not better. And I think that it's become more acceptable to be wandering around with little bits of white or black in your ears. But one of the key things for me was less around talking around deafness, was talking about it as a disability. For years I've said, well, I'm not disabled enough. I don't feel my deafness is a disability. But I would then sit in a group of deaf people. I was chair of Deaf Olympics GB for about 10 years. And I think over that time, we go back to the question around training, learning from those conversations, and just simply learning by being immersed in it was important. But then I would feel much more comfortable by moving into a space where I was on my own, and talking around that, and talking around how difficult I felt to be able to put my hand up, because I didn't think I was disabled enough. So I now will say I'm disabled, and clearly there are gradations of that disability. I work with people who are profoundly deaf, and I work with people with cochlear implants, and I work with people who sign, and I work with people who have hearing aids. But I think now I feel much more comfortable being able to do that. I hope it creates a safer space for others to open up around it. I think it does. I think talking around the stealth aspect of my deafness and my heritage, I think is important, and it allows people to be able to sort of understand those aspects of it. But I feel sometimes, to talk about the fear, I feel sometimes uncomfortable, and I feel sometimes as if it's in no way, shape, or form should I be talking about my deafness compared to some of the difficulties that somebody else may well have had growing up. But I do think that by everybody talking about those narratives, it does help.
Thank you, Piers, and thank you for being so open about that too. I have another question from, I'm not even going to attempt to say it. It's not a proper, not a proper name. It's BRKNH. I think someone's just put some letters in there, and it's 16 at the end. But the question is, what were the key factors that led you to be more comfortable with speaking about your identities today versus when you were younger? And how can we create that same change for others?
I think that's a brilliant question. And I think a lot of that comes with experience. I coach people in early stage careers, and they're always sort of asking around some of those things. I asked the same of my mentors when I was early stage career. And I remember one of my mentors saying to me, well, it's easy for me because I have grey hair, I have a grey beard, I can walk into a boardroom and people will immediately listen because they have biases about me as an older person. Now here I am. I think experience allowed me to be able to do that. I think I was very lucky that I had senior positions quite early on in my career, and it gave me the confidence to be able to talk around that. I think understanding the psychology of personality was critical for me to be able to understand how different personalities and different values and different lived experiences come together to create that identity. And as Ant and I talk about all the time, it's at the heart of everything we do in leadership development. The more you can understand yourself, the more you will be a better leader and manager, because you will be able to understand the person in front of you. And that part, any technical ability is important. We know that ability is important. We know that motivation is important, and we know that personality and situation is important. If you can understand yourself and you can understand the person in front of you and you can understand the impact of the environment, you will be better at that. And so I know that's made me better. And so I know that I'm more comfortable speaking around it. And the last thing is, I think having the comfort to be able to speak openly and freely with people who are perhaps in more senior positions, I think is something that just simply comes with practice, and it comes with just being open and candid. Can I give you some feedback? Can I tell you a little bit more about myself? 9 times out of 10 people, A, love being flattered by saying, can I spend some time with you? And B, can I just give you some information about me?
That's brilliant. I feel like it's an area that a lot of people struggle with is communicating or managing upwards. And a lot of that is you need to be a bit intelligent and pick the right time, and because you never know what the other person is going through while you're a manager or someone who's hierarchically above you. Thank you. I've one more question, which is also a great question and quite specific. So we have this is from Mahmood, and they've said, in Egypt, employees must stay silent to avoid embarrassing others out of fear or sometimes fear of mistakes. How can leaders encourage open and honest dialogue in this culture?
This is really hard, especially within cultures where speaking out is frowned upon, and sometimes is dangerous or forbidden. I'll come back to very much around the radical candor point I made before around providing feedback. Feedback is a gift, and feedback helps you to perform. And it's difficult sometimes being able to talk around fear of mistakes. The F word, being able to fail fast, is now accepted as a high performance measure. There are plenty of case studies around organizations and companies that are now encouraging people to be able to make mistakes early on so that we're not spending money in the future. That we know now that is a better way of developing organizations, developing companies. So it's very easy for me to sit here and suggest that people may well not be able to do this within a different culture, but we would still come back to, are we here to be able to high perform? Are we here to be able to develop and to lead the company or lead the organization or lead people to perform better and to improve and to continuously improve? And if that is the case, let's look at the processes that we go through. Let's look at the myths that we have, the decision making and the biases that we have. Let's look at the way in which we give feedback to each other. And let's talk around open and honest dialogue, because open and honest dialogue and candor is how you will improve and how you will talk around things. And it's about focusing on the box in the middle, not around talking. So if you get a group of people together and somebody's made a mistake, rather than talk about the individual, talk about the box in the middle. This is what we're trying to fix. This is the issue we're trying to fix. How do we change this? How do we fix this? How do we make this better? That way you don't need to point at somebody and say that person made a mistake. The box has made the mistake. How do we all now fix it?
Thank you. And culture is extremely difficult to change within an organization. It takes a lot of time and perhaps resource and changing of people. And if it's a national culture, that's even more difficult, virtually impossible to change, especially in the short term. Thank you. I have one question for you, Piers. What's your main challenge in the diversity space? What's been your main challenge, biggest challenge in the diversity space?
I think we've touched on it beforehand, which is myths around things. People have preconceptions about the person in front of them. I've been privileged to work with John Amici through the Activity Alliance, and one of the things that I loved him talking around is someone said to me, "Well, how do I, as a white man, how do I manage a black woman?" And John said, "Well, you manage a black woman the same way you would manage a white man." And the conversation, he gives several examples and sort of goes on like that. And I think the biggest challenge sometimes is that you have to do something differently. Every single person is different. And so that's the biggest learning that I've had. But the biggest challenge I've got is the myth around that, the myth that we have to do something differently for people. Now, there are ways that we have to allow people to support people. For example, I've mentioned around disabled people. There are things that we have to do to make sure that they can do their job properly and they can do their job effectively, and you can highlight some strengths. But the biggest challenge is shattering some of the myths around that, shattering some of the myths around neurodiversity and that you can only pick certain people for certain things, shattering the myths around psychometrics and choosing somebody who's an extrovert to do a particular job, which is absolute rubbish. We can only choose extroverts, choose somebody who's social.
Thank you so much, Piers. So you froze a bit there, but I think it's my end rather than yours. I'd like to thank you all so much.
So that's it for today's session. Thank you all for joining. Thank you to Anthony and thank you to Piers for your insight and expertise. Stay tuned to hear more about CMI membership, and thank you for joining us.
Don't forget, as a CMI member, you can find the latest management and leadership insights at managers.org.uk. If you're not yet a member, join our community to discover CMI Confidence with on-demand resources, our network of mentors, and industry-leading accreditations.